So my name is Sushil Gupta. I was 12 years old when my mother was killed on board Air India Flight 182. My mother was Ramwati Gupta. She was 37 at the time. My father, who was a scientist by profession, but a natural advocate, I would say, he started collecting names of the families, and he had some type of forethought that he would need to do this. And together with many, if not most of the families, at least in Canada, as well as some in India and overseas in the US and the UK, he formed the Air India Flight 182 Victims' Families Association.
My name is Bal Gupta. I am chair of Air India 182 Victims' Families Association. On June 23, 1985, I lost my wife of 20 years at that time and was left with two boys, 18 and 12.
My name is Rob Alexander. I live in Hamilton, Ontario. My father was going back home to see his mother, who was back home in India, South India, we're from. Anchanat Matthew Alexander. But people called him, his buddies here at the hospital, he was a doctor, his buddies always called him Alex. So that was his name, yeah.
In my situation, it was both of my older sisters that were on the flight. So I was 17 at the time, and they were 19 and 21. My oldest sister was Chandra. She was a pharmacy student, soon to graduate from the University of Saskatchewan. And my 19-year-old sister was Manju. She was in second year med school, also at the University of Saskatchewan. So I was 17, and the tricky part for me is I was actually supposed to be on that flight as well. And I had just canceled my ticket just days beforehand because I had gotten a scholarship to attend another university program. And so we had canceled my ticket. So, one always thinks about that as well.
I was 15. My sister was 2 years younger, almost, not quite 13, almost. And my brother was 9 years old. And my dad, I said, was 40, and my mom was 40 as well. So I'm 52 now. So it's a bitter pill to always think about, unfortunately, 36 years later.
I woke up by a phone call from a friend of mine around 5 o'clock or 5:30. And he said, okay, just listen to radio news and I'm coming to your home very quickly. That was the way I came to know, and I turned the radio on. And I heard the news that the plane has disappeared off the radar and they don't expect any survivors.
One of the worst air disasters ever, and it's taken more Canadian lives than any other crash in history. Air India Flight 182 simply disappeared from radar screens off the coast of Ireland. On board were 329 people. More than 280 of them were Canadians. At least 86 of the passengers were children. It is almost certain that no one survived.
Air India 182, Shannon. Air India 182, Shannon, do you read?
Link between that and the bomb which exploded at Narita Airport in Japan at around the same time yesterday morning.
Police believe the bomb went off prematurely before the baggage was transferred to a connecting Air India flight to Bombay. Worst case of mass murder in Canadian history. In fact, the worst act of aviation terrorism in the history of the world.
I mean, the short definition would be, there was a flight leaving Canada from Toronto and Mirabel Airport on its way to New Delhi. About an hour outside of London, off the coast of Ireland, a bomb that was placed in a suitcase in the cargo hold with the luggage exploded. Unfortunately, all 329 people, most of them Canadians and Canadian citizens, perished. And, since it was over the ocean, it was very difficult. Only 132 of the bodies were actually ever recovered. And so many of us, didn't get the bodies back. I went to Ireland at the time of the bombing to try to, recover what bodies we could. We only got one.
in the beginning, there was virtually no cooperation from my perspective. There was some, if you want to separate those other parties, there was some investigation going on, but there wasn't much communication to the families. But at that time, again, even when the government knew about bomb threats and things like that these guys were threatening to put a bomb on an Air India flight. And back then, there was only one flight a week. It wasn't one a day or one every 2 days. It was one a week. My 13-year-old son could have policed it better.
I mean, this was a completely preventable tragedy. CSIS had recently been formed. There was turf wars that were going on. They did not share information. They had, quite strong evidence on people who were planning a bombing of this sort. Information was not shared. And as a result of it, very bad things happened. And the bomb killed 329 people due to the lack of cooperation. And then that lack of cooperation continued. So once the bombing happened, they basically were trying to protect themselves and not get blamed. And so they weren't sharing information. And that resulted in, taking a very long time to understand what actually happened and any attempts to actually progress with the investigation. They just kind of viewed it as a foreign tragedy that they had nothing to do with, even though, over 260 of the people were Canadians out of 329. But that's how the Canadian government acted.
We were made to feel it was just a plane full of brown people that no one cared about. Even Brian Mulroney at the time, he called Rajiv Gandhi and gave his condolences, which is nice of him to do, but he didn't realize that the majority of the people on that plane were Canadian taxpayers, including my father.
It took over 20 years for a Canadian prime minister to even meet with the families. Like, just think about how shocking that is when you have the largest mass murder of Canadians and the worst act of aviation terrorism in the world except for 9/11. And it takes 20 years for the prime minister of the country to actually sit down with the families. So, I mean, that I think just gives you a real example of how horrific the government was in treating the families.
Around the 10-year point after 85, so 1995, the then RCMP officer in charge decided that he would go and meet with all the families. And that's really when we started seeing a change.
First, they finally managed to get one person extradited from England, which people thought, many of them in the government of the day thought could not be done. But there were some, I don't know what to call them, heroes or honest lawyers in the Justice Department. They managed to successfully extradite one person from England. They charged two other people, and the case went to court, and then finally in 2005, they were acquitted. One was, I think the one who was extradited, he was convicted, but the other two were acquitted for lack of sufficient evidence beyond any doubt.
And even after the trial, though, when the families asked for a public inquiry, we were denied by the government at the time, being told that there was nothing left to learn, that everything that could have been learned was. Thankfully, I would say for Canadians, as well as the victims' families, the next government that came into power did, so that was 21 years after the bombing, did call a public inquiry.
I think there's enough fact and documentation. It may not be all provable in court, but I think there's pretty clear evidence of who the main actors were and what they did and activities of that sort. But they are still roaming. Many of them that are alive are still free and enjoying birthday parties that you and I will never get to go to.
The biggest unanswered question is who were the chief conspirators? They are there, they have not disappeared, and they are still running free in the society. Justice is to more or less, number one, give the true picture. Who did it? How it happened? How it could have been avoided. Two things. How it happened, who did it, and how it could have been avoided.
Justice to us and many of the families meant a fulsome investigation.
That's a hard question. I don't know whether we will see true justice. Because in the end, sorry.
It's now been 36 years. The people that were responsible for this murder of 329 people. And I do want to mention there was 2 baggage handlers also murdered in Narita airport that were in a related bombing. You know, for them, there is no justice. The people have not been held accountable. They're still free. And that's very difficult to take as a family member after all these years, that someone can get away with this, you know, second worst act of aviation terrorism in the world and still not be held accountable for it.
In Canada, I don't think that we have true justice. You know, we have people that, you know, do heinous things, you know, and some people that know about it and condone it. If you don't say something, you can, in my opinion, you condone it.
Now, again, I would say things did improve, but it took like over 20 years before we started to see some real progress in how the government agencies, as well as law enforcement of RCMP and CSIS, working together to try to at least hold some people accountable for this activity.
We are told, and I think we believe that there is still an active investigation into those remaining individuals. Of course, 36 years and counting is a challenge to collect evidence, to collect statements, and so forth. But I think we still have, many of us at least, not all, but many still do have faith that the other potential suspects will be charged at some point in the future.
I think the credit goes to all the members of our association who were behind us. But as I said, there were about 10, 12, or 15 people who did not give up in spite of the sometimes what appeared to be insurmountable difficulties.
I think there can be healing personally, but it takes time, unfortunately. And but we will be there to support you as we've gone through this. And some of us are still strong enough to try and help and support. And we feel we have a duty to all of you, as well as to all Canadians, and the memories of our loved ones to help. And if I were there in person, I would be there to give you a hug and not just let you cry on my shoulder, but to cry with you, to cry together, because we care.
For your loved ones and the 176 people, please keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting to get the truth to come out. And hopefully in your case, maybe the people that are held accountable for what they did. And so as difficult as it is and as emotionally hard as it is, it's an important thing to do.
That's the terrible waste of life at Air India and this and in your situation. Waste of life. That's what it is. That's the sad thing.